I think that, there are most of the stuff that had been written about psychedelics, and most of the stuff I was reading was written from like inside the world, already convinced that these were great things that were going to change human consciousness. And that's a turnoff to people, especially if you have this resistance, which many, many people do. There's so much cultural baggage around psychedelics left over from the 60s. People, the risks, the how disruptive it was to society, and people still hold these ideas in their head. People say, well, don't people like jump off of buildings? Mm-hmm. I mean, I hear these, or doesn't it scramble your chromosomes? These are urban legends by and large, although there were some people who jumped off of buildings, but the chromosome thing was not true. The staring at the sun till you go blind was not true. But it's amazing the power of these memes and just lingering in our culture.
Well, there's a great fear of losing your mind. I mean, you know about the guy from Pink Floyd, and people hear about, some guy in the neighborhood that did too much acid. Yeah. The thing is, they are real. Like, there are real people.
They're casualties.
And
I think we have to acknowledge that. And I think unless we're really frank about the risks, we risk another backlash, because bad shit will happen.
Yes.
If you're trialing, a couple thousand people for depression, which they're doing, these clinical trials to see if psilocybin can help with depression, some of those people are going to commit suicide. That's what depressed people do. And, especially if you get them off their SSRIs, that increases the risk. But that narrative, when someone in a clinical trial for depression with psychedelics gets out there, it'll plug into this old narrative about people jumping off of buildings. Whereas people routinely commit suicide on SSRIs, and it doesn't make the news.
Right.
So there are these. It's when a story plugs into an existing narrative in the culture that it really takes off. It has this incredible power, and that could happen. So I think we should be. I think the way you inoculate the culture is talking about risk and say that there were casualties. There are people who did I don't want to say fry their brains, because it's pretty imprecise, but people had some psychotic breaks on psychedelics. Would they have had them anyway? There's reason to believe they would. It's not like schizophrenia rates went up during the 60s.
Do you think it triggers schizophrenia,
yes.
though? Yeah,
I think that's probably what happens. Any kind of traumatic experience can do it. Divorce of parents can do it. If you're at that age and you have that vulnerability, going to graduate school for a certain number of people does it. Extreme stress, and it can be an extreme experience. So there is a good reason that people, even second-degree relatives who have schizophrenia, you can't participate in any of these trials. They're screening people, and also for manic depression, they're screening you out, and there are good reasons for that.
Yeah, there's this discussion about cannabis that's been going on for a while now, of what happens to people particularly when they eat edibles. Is it something that triggers schizophrenia? And I think the numbers, as you're saying, they really do mirror the numbers that just happen in a general population. Like, it's 1 out of 100. Yeah. And 1 out of 100 people seem to have a significant problem.
Yeah, I mean, a certain number of people are at risk. They're bound to get schizophrenia at those windows. I think it's in right around 20 and right around 30 years old seems to be the window.
Really? And, there's a very specific window?
Oh, yeah. No, it happens at a very specific time.
Do they think it's like transitionary periods in your life with additional stress, like you have a breaking point or something?
It isn't really clear. It may be a developmental issue. Boys or men are still developing into their 20s, right? Their brain development.
I think into their 50s.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But there's certain brain structures that are not, finished at that age. Honestly, I don't know. I'm out of my depth here.
Yeah. What was the motivation to write this new book?
So, the motivation for this book grew out of a long-standing interest in our relationship to plants. I've been obsessed with plants since I was like an 8-year-old gardener, and I've written a lot about how we use plants and how plants use us, and that relationship has been of keen interest. And I looked at food. Eating plants is obviously one of the big things we do with them and a big part of our relationship. And then when I started working on psychedelics, I was really struck by the fact that one of the things humans have used plants for forever is to change consciousness. And that seemed like a very curious phenomenon. But there is every culture on Earth, with one notable exception, has some plant or fungus that they use regularly and often ceremonially to change consciousness. The